Welcome, everyone. Today's session from NIST 800-171 to CMMC is about to begin. I'd like to welcome everybody. Hope everybody's staying safe during these winter conditions. We're going to discuss a roadmap to help ensure DoD contract wins and how it progresses with the current environment with the DFAR rule changes. We've got some very talented and impactful speakers today that I'm pleased to have with us. We've got Christopher Newborn. He's a member of the Defense Acquisition and Cybersecurity Workforce, and he's been appointed a professor of IT with especially an emphasis on cybersecurity for the Defense Acquisition University since 2015. His duties include not only developing curriculum, but also teaching and consulting with members of the acquisition and cybersecurity workforce within the DoD for those that are responsible for defending their networks, systems, and data. He's got, a lot of cybersecurity credentials as well, more than 22 years of cybersecurity and information assurance expertise. And in addition, he's got over 30 years of federal contracting expertise as well. So he's got a wealth of knowledge, and he's right in the middle of the transitions that we're all going through in the defense industrial base. Our next speaker will be Darren Booven. He's currently the lead principal consultant at Trustwave for their consulting and professional services portfolio. And he serves as a trusted advisor to board of directors and executive leadership within many industries across the Americas. Along with having many cybersecurity credentials as well, over 20 years of experience with hands-on technical and business leadership. He's also a former Chief Information Security Officer, Idaho National Labs under Department of Energy. And before that, he was also the Chief Information Security Officer for the U.S. House of Representatives. And before that, had a unique career in the Central Intelligence Agency. So thank you both for your service to the country as well. And myself, Scott Armstrong, Senior Director for Risk Applications at Exostar. And I've got about 20 years background in cybersecurity again, primarily focused on delivering solutions out to industry, both in the federal and commercial markets. First, just a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar today is scheduled to last about 1 hour, including Q&A at the end. All participants will remain muted so that the speakers can present without interruption. The questions have been submitted prior to the event, and many of these questions we'll try to answer as part of the presentation that's been developed. We'll have a few questions at the end, time permitting, and we can also follow up if there's additional questions after the event. In the case of an outage, please wait for a minute and refresh the page. This webinar is being recorded, so it will be available via demand via our resource library post-event. And if you want to speak with one of our industry experts or ask for a copy of the slide deck, just reach out to us at cmmc-team@exostar.com, or you can use the live chat feature on our website as well. On that note, I'd like to hand it over to Christopher Newborn and let you take the lead, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott. I greatly appreciate this, as well as I appreciate Exostar for providing me the opportunity to present in this forum. So why DAU? Why Defense Acquisition University? And I'll just say that I'm your liaison, I'm your collaborator, and I work between academia, industry, and the government. And what my responsibility is to make sure that I get the information out so we can take a look at this, and it's collaboration and a team as a win-win. Next slide, please. So as we transition from the DFARS 252.204-7012, which was really focused on the NIST 800-171, and transition to the new, what we call the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certificate, which is, to me, a more defined process, but we have to take a look at it in regards to these 3 steps: crawl, walk, and run. And in the very beginning, starting back in 2015, when we first started looking at the DFARS of really protecting the crucial sensitive information that resides on the contractors' networks and systems, we had to try to establish some type of security baseline. And that was really the purpose and the first substantiation of the 171. As we transition to this new CMMC, it provides not only the baseline, but it better defines the protection levels from levels 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, from the basic cyber hygiene at level 1 all the way up to level 5, which is the being able to address the advanced persistent threat. So as we're doing that, we have to really say, we can't go straight from the crawl to the run. We have to do it in stages. So the first part is the crawl, which was first introduced, and that's the interim rule in November 30th of last year, where it started requiring the contractors to perform their self-assessment, and that's going to be based on the NIST 800-171, the 109 security requirements, plus the addition of the system security plan to do your self-assessment. Do that based on the DoD assessment methodology tool. I call it the DAM tool, but it's really taking a look at the implementation of those 109 plus 1 security requirements, scoring yourself and uploading that into the SPURS, which is supplier performance. I keep forgetting what the SPURS. I say it so much. But sorry about that, but it's really getting that self-assessment into the database. And the reasoning for that is twofold. Number one, to ensure that you have done the assessment and to do your own validation verification, but also is to notify the government that that has been done too. There is a plus and a minus. And this is one of the things where I talk to the CMMC AB in regards to Jeff and in regards to Reagan on a weekly and every other week basis to get results from them in regards to them training their assessors in order to figure out what needs to be done to do the validation verification, to identify those particular artifacts. And one of the things that they keep reminding me is, Chris, keep on telling in your chart, in your forums, not only the government, but also industry, please do your self-assessment. Please upload it into the SPURS database. That is a critical thing to let us know where we are. At the moment, he indicated that only 55,000 companies so far have uploaded their self-assessments out of over 300,000 plus. So we have a long way to go, because the next step that we want to do is the walk. And the walk is taking a look at those self-assessments and going to the next level, which is the medium to high assessments. That's where the government, that's where the DICAP, the Defense in Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center from DCMA, along with government, is going to come in and do those medium to high assessments. And it's going to be not just the self-assessment, but also including taking a look at your system's security plan, taking a look at any plans of actions, as well as taking a look at any other documentation that you can have to validate, verify. That's at the medium. And then the high is the full-blown, where they actually conduct in-depth interviews. So this is going to give us a baseline to say where we are on the 171, and then how far we have to go to on the CMMC. And then the run is the actual implementation of the CMMC. Next slide, please. So this really emphasizes what I was talking about in regards to the crawl, walk, and run. And I really want you to take a look at as of 1st of December. And this is what I represent in regards to the acquisition workforce of what they're required to do. And you need to understand this because it's very, very important. The first one, that self-assessment must be uploaded. And if it is, it's going to enable two things. It's going to enable the contracting office officer who's responsible for awarding new contracts to award that because they're going to take a look at the spurs and to see which contractors have and have not uploaded their self-assessment. So that's for new contracts that are going to be still applicable to the 7012, the DFAR 7012. And then the next one, I have the next bullet, is exercising any option period or extending the period of performance of existing contracts. So even for that, if you have not uploaded your spurs, your self-assessment into the spurs, then you're going to get dinged for that. So those are the two things, and those are the impacts that you have. Get the spurs in. And I know some companies are coming back and say, well, boy, if I do that, and if I don't have 100%, that's really going to hurt me. No, it's not. It's just a way of communicating. And if there is any issue, then we really, on the acquisition side, want you, and we'll start working with you to see how we can get you to get well. Next slide, please. And then this is another kind of like an add-in to really help you prepare for that run. And the run is taking a look at the roles and responsibilities from the government aspects, as well as the roles and responsibilities from the contractor aspect of what is the expectation, and then what's going to lead to that successful assessment that is going to be done to validate and verify your adherence to the not only security requirements, but as you migrate to the new CMMC process of the practices and the processes. So the first one is, of course, the government has to identify the federal contract information and to control unclassified information. The second thing is the government should really provide and update their security classification guides that will provide more fidelity of what is federal contract information and control unclassified information. And then the next one is the work breakdown structure. That's going to give a visual picture of the supply chain of the information as it goes from the first tier all the way down to the nth tier. The next one is the program protection plan that will identify any type of critical technology that we need to be protection. And then the last one is the quality assurance surveillance plan. That's after contract has been let. And this is where the government's going to come up with their metrics and let you know what they're going to measure in regards to your adherence to still safeguarding that information based on the sensitivity of the information, the aggregation of the information, the network configuration changes of the network, as well as the added capabilities of the threat. And then on the other side, the contractor, the subcontractor, you're really going to react based upon developing, updating your artifacts and deliverables per the request for information and request for proposal. You're going to be responsible for requesting that third-party independent organization to perform the CMMC assessment. And then the last thing is going to be key critical, but it's going to be a hard thing, is really develop your supply chain and your tier 1 and below contractor support agreements to reflect the work breakdown structure. And with that, I will turn it over to the next speaker.
All right, thank you, Chris. Enjoyed that. That was very informative. Also want to thank Exostar for the opportunity to be here with you today, and thank everybody for their valuable time. I'm sure many, if not most of you, have done a lot of research into what CMMC is, hence part of the reason you're listening to us speak. The most common concern I tend to hear from people is now what? How do I begin eating this elephant? As Chris talked earlier about crawl, walk, run, what does that look like from a practitioner's perspective? You know, how do you actually take those first steps? I've spoken with literally hundreds of people over the last several months with businesses ranging from very small companies ranging from 5 to 10 people to very large organizations. And what I'll do here is walk you through some of the thoughts I have on strategy based on feedback and questions and concerns that I tend to hear a lot. So hopefully you'll find these things of value. I'm also speaking from the perspective of a practitioner and would talk through what I would actually do in your shoes. So again, what does this actually look like? So first and foremost, CMMC is a certification framework, which is a lot different than the 800-171 self-assessment approach, a lot of what Chris was just speaking to. And the key difference here is that with a certification framework, I tell people you can have the best, most robust implemented controls on the planet, but if you can't generate the evidence or what I would call the audit artifacts to the assessors to prove that you have those controls in place, it really doesn't matter. You'll end up not being able to pass those sections. So the goal here is to get yourself ready for the assessment in a way that will not just accomplish what you need to, and doing so in an efficient and effective manner, but also setting yourself up to where you have the ability to generate compliance artifacts as a natural part of what you do with the least amount of effort possible. So as indicated in the slide here, really what this is all about, especially in terms of the certification framework, is about your data. You really can't make much meaningful progress in thinking about these requirements without first starting there. And before you do anything else, it's critically important to understand your data environment. If you haven't already, I highly suggest performing what I call an information inventory, which takes a good, objective, hard look at your environment and to know what data sets you have. And write them out. You could describe them in any way that you like that makes sense to you, but actually create, much like you would do a physical inventory of your hardware and software, do the same with your data sets. Identify what they are and where they are. Next, recommend working with your own company's contract people or logistics officer to assemble your government contracts that you have, the contracts that you're currently working on, and take a look at them, actually read through them. And to the degree you can, and this may be in concert with multiple members on your team, it could be your leadership team, finance, contracts, compliance, security, IT, or some combination thereof. Map those data sets that you identified in your inventory over to the relevant government contract. This way you know what data sets correspond to which contracts. And the more contracts you have, of course, the more important this becomes. Many clients I speak with will have dozens, if not hundreds of even contracts, and you need to be able to understand these things. So those are two activities alone. I haven't even really started talking about CMMC. These are just things that recommended practices to follow to make more easily. You could kind of think of it as putting on your shoes before you get up to do the walking and the running. It'll be a little bit harder if you don't have those shoes and you start needing to run fast. The little green circle at the bottom here in this slide, I have a couple of these next couple slides, just represents some questions that you have to ask yourself as you go through thinking about whether or not CMMC actually applies to you. And many of you may know this, but I'll break this down as much as I can to make it easy to understand, because I know that for every one person that may know this very well, there's an equal number of people probably that don't. So with that, the first and easiest question to ask yourself is whether your data sets are classified or unclassified. There's actually some people, more than some, who tend to get confused between the difference and how those actually apply to CMMC. And I understand that quite simply because the CMMC framework and these requirements are new. And so it will take some time for people who aren't used to thinking about these things to really understand what that means. The easiest answer to this question is that classified data is not a part of the CMMC discussion. The security requirements for that are driven by national security system regulations. So really you can not think about those. I've actually managed a lot of classified systems and environments myself, either as a CISO or part of the IT environment. And those requirements and regulations are, while you may have some similar practices in place that can map over to CMMC, they're vastly different in terms of how they have to be implemented, and then how they're reviewed also by federal assessors. So you could just kind of X those out and just focus on the unclassified aspects of the environment. Next slide here. Scott, thank you. Once you have your data identified and know how your data sets cross-reference to your contracts, in the context of this discussion, we're focused on Department of Defense related contracts. So really you can further divide out your contracts into defense and non-defense. The reason I bring this out is a lot of you may have a mixture of different business lines or even subsidiaries where you may have multiple types of government contracts, some with defense, some with other aspects of the government. You may also have a commercial business segment that has contracts with other companies out there which aren't related. And so, but again, knowing where your data sets actually are and how they relate to your contracts is very important. And we'll touch more on this here shortly. And once you've set that aside and you start asking yourself, where is this data being processed and how and where is it being transmitted? How is the data accessed? Again, these are things which will give you the foundation for the future planning. An important thing to keep in mind is that a given defense contract may have a prime contractor and multiple subcontractors. Quite a few of them do, particularly the largest ones. And I'm sure most, if not all of you, are familiar with that model. All members of the team who are working together to deliver the government products and services have to collectively understand the flow of information that they're working on so that they can determine where they may fall on the necessary CMMC maturity level number. And it's important to know too that not all members of the contract will need the same certification level. And we'll also touch on that here shortly. That's something important to keep in mind. Another thing which I'll include as a footnote here is if you haven't already, just making sure that you have an open dialogue with your government contracting officer, or if you're a sub, just with your prime contract officer, just to make sure that you get level set on what their expectations are, and also allow you to ask questions. I've read many government contracts over the course of my career. A lot of the older ones in particular may not specify what types of data that you're actually working with. And so you may have to do a little bit of detective work to figure out what those data types are. Looking here at the bottom is another little green dot. We talked about classified versus unclassified. Another question which you can ask, which is pretty easy to further kind of narrow things down, is whether or not your systems that you're working with are federal or non-federal. So if you're familiar with 800-171, which is the NIST publication that you have to follow for DFARS implementation for control of classified data, that applies to non-federal systems. So these are systems that you're operating yourself as part of a contract team to generate or provide the products and services to the government. You're not actually providing or you're not actually running an actual federal system. If you're actually an organization that's as part of your contract running a federal system, those requirements fall underneath and are guided by FSMA and then 853. And odds are the government organization you're working with have reviewed your environment to give you an authority to operate, or ATO. So if you hear anything about an ATO, those are federal requirements. So with 800-171, we're talking about non-federal here. And this is where CMMC further gets further in depth. So next slide, please. And I mentioned CUI, which is my way of referring to control unclassified information. Everybody has their different way of saying it. But then also FCI, or federal contract information. Those are the two main data types associated with CMMC and with the 800-171 implementation that we're talking about here. For FCI, if you have a government contract, it's a foregone conclusion that you have FCI in the environment, just because anything pertaining to the contract itself is FCI. And control unclassified data, and this is where we'll spend just a couple of minutes here on this slide and the next one to understand. It's critically important that you understand if you have this or not. Many organizations I've spoken with who may have done the self-assessment and done reporting in spurs, like Chris was speaking of earlier, find out sometimes later that some of the data they're working with is actually CUI. And the reason they didn't know that before is they've never really looked at or performed a data inventory and figured out what types of data that they have. So another question I therefore get is, what exactly is CUI and how do you identify that? We could spend probably an entire day on this topic, which of course we don't have, but I'll walk you through some things that I would think about in terms of helping you with this. So the reason this is so important is that if you have CUI, that's entirely something you have to be aware of today to follow, again, as Chris was referencing with the self-assessment and reporting in SPRS. You must implement 800-171 control practices per DFARS requirements today for any CUI that you have. So it's very important just for today, but then it's also important for how you look at CMMC readiness. Looking at the little two check boxes here, FCI and CUI really are two different types of information from a sensitivity perspective. The way CMMC works is if you have FCI, or you could also think of it as non-CUI, that essentially places you into maturity level 1 and 2. But if you do have any kind of CUI data sets, the minimum requirement will shoot you up into at least level 3. And since there's such a big difference between maturity level 3 and maturity level 1, this is a very important thing to make sure that you have straight before continuing on. Next slide, please. I won't read all of this here. This is mostly just for your information. If you're not familiar with how to distinguish or identify FCI and CUI, but know that there is a defined way of defining what these are, and you can look in the relevant FAR clause, and then CUI as well. And I'll have this on the next slide. The DoD CUI program is really what you want to be looking at there. But CUI data is unclassified information that you may store, create, process, transmit as part of your contract that requires additional dissemination controls or safeguarding. So things that are more sensitive in nature. If you're building a fighter jet and your company's piece of the puzzle has to do with producing the throttle handle, for example, or something like that, by itself, it may not be anything that is CUI, but if the data that you work with has something to do with the overall mechanics of the system and how your parts fit in, that could very easily be a type of CUI. And not everybody who's a federal contractor will have CUI inside their environment, but you very well may. And again, the most important thing you do here is if you have CUI that you identify it. Next slide, please. It can get a little complex in terms of looking at your data sets and trying to figure out what types of CUI you have. The only reason I put this slide isn't to really go into those complexities so much as to alert you to be aware for them. And you may need to ask for help from either your contracting officer or have a link here to DoD's CUI program. And if you go there, there's a lot of training and information about what the DoD CUI program looks like. And there's something called a CUI registry. If you've ever heard that term before, it really represents there's a DoD CUI registry, which represents how DoD actually defines the different categories of CUI. There's training on marking of data and how to handle the data and whatnot. Again, it's the most important thing that you could do is invest time in understanding these things if you do have CUI data sets. The complexities I just throw up here on the two boxes is that there are different kinds of data types which sometimes require additional controls above and beyond CMMC. So many of you may know this, but just meeting CMMC may not sufficiently address all of the requirements that you have for some of these data sets. So if you're aware of what ITAR data is, ITAR is a special program whose requirements get driven from Department of State. It's export controlled information. And there are a lot of other requirements beyond just what you would think of as CMMC level 3 practices that you have to adhere to. And so if you have, let's say, ITAR or export controlled data as part of your CUI data sets, when you're thinking about how to approach your planning and your compliance artifacts, you have to also factor in these extra requirements beyond just CMMC. And some of the data on the left-hand side there, like uncontrolled, unclassified controlled nuclear information, or UCNI as we call it, that's largely driven from Department of Energy requirements, but Department of Defense in many cases has this information. Those require special markings. NNPI or Naval Nuclear Propulsion information from the Navy, very similar. It has its own set of markings and information. in DoD critical information security or critical infrastructure security information is the same way. And then control technical information is another umbrella of CUI, which won't go into here, but that's something that you have to be aware of. Next, please. So let's say you've done all of this stuff and you have a great handle on what data you have, what your contracts are, who you're working with, how the data is shared, and you have all of this good stuff in place, which regardless of what you do in the future pertaining to CMMC, that's just a really good business practice to have. I think it'll make you stronger in the long run for competing in additional contracts, being able to partner with other companies, and just having a deeper understanding of what goes on in the environment, because you may find out efficiencies in terms of how you do business. And much along those lines with efficiency, this goes back to the key difference between CMMC and the self-assessment based on 171, is that like any certification program, you have to define the scope of the certification. And so I call this the CMMC boundary, just because many of you, if you've gone through a let's say an authorization to operate with a government system, or you've done like a SOC 2 type assessment, you define the environment in which your data sets live, and it's really the controls and practices applied to that environment or that boundary that you get your CMMC certification for. So if you're a company with a lot of commercial contracts, for example, as well as government contracts, you're not necessarily going to want to get a CMMC certification for all of your commercial systems, just because you may not have to. It may make a lot more sense from a cost and efficiency purpose to scope those things out and only focus on your DoD data sets, or the CUI data sets that we're most concerned about here. So this is something that not a lot of people think about, but it's really, after you've gone through the previous steps that just spoke of, identifying your data and whatnot, it's really the next most important thing to do when you look at your environment. As mentioned earlier, when I said that not all contract companies may need the same CMMC maturity level, it all comes down again back to the data. It depends on the data types that you have and where they live. So you can actually have a subcontractor who needs to reach out and access CUI in your environment, but they don't need to download it into their environment or work with it, and they don't have a need to create any. If that's the case, there's actually a way to structure your environment into an enclave approach or a segmented environment, such that that partner company or that subcontractor doesn't need to get a maturity level 3, whereas you might. However, if the way things are set up today is that your subcontractor accesses the information because you send it to them, let's say that you're sending them CUI, that means that they'll have to get at least a maturity level 3. But if you can redesign it such that you're not actually sending them the information, but they're accessing it from your environment in a way that doesn't pull the information down, then you actually take that maturity level 3 requirement away from them. So as you can see, there's a big picture here when you piece together the different parts of your contract and your data sets. And kind of the same is true if you're actually the sub CUI from a prime, let's say, and you really don't need a way you can reach out and access the information without pulling it down. That actually might be a way you can get out from under needing to be maturity level 3. You may need to only be a maturity level 1. So that's something that the CMMC accreditation body advises, is that, or they actually recommend in their training, to use enclaves to more narrowly define your boundary, if that makes sense to do so. And so there's a combination here of not just looking at the requirements of compliance, but also looking at how are you technically securing this information, and the strategy that you take can make things a lot more efficient and therefore decrease your long-term compliance burden. I put in the little box here, ways to fail assessment, kind of along these lines. It's going to be very easy to fail in the sense that either you have this stuff in place or you don't. And like a lot of military, well, all of them, I would say, military inspections, if you've ever been through those, you either pass or fail. You don't tend to really get any partial credit. So if you've defined your boundary wrong, let's say, and the assessor shows up and looks at your or does the assessment, but finds out in the middle of the assessment that you actually have some CUI data sets somewhere else in the environment that you didn't tell them about, odds are they're going to fail you, because the way the boundary was set up and the way the test was designed was around that specific environment. So that's why that part is very important. As with any auditor assessment, making sure that your documentation accurately reflects reality, of course. Are you doing what you say you're doing? Even if you are doing what you say you're doing and you can't generate the artifacts to show or prove to the assessor, that's an easy way to not pass. And then also making sure that your controls have been in place for some time. This is definitely not an assessment that you can just put into place and get tested for the next day. The assessors are going to be looking for implementation over a period of time. Okay, next slide here, Scott. And I only have 2 more. All right. One of my favorite sayings, and those of you who know me well will hear this come from me very often, is that if it isn't written, it doesn't exist. And I was just talking here about lack of partial credit, the need to generate artifacts. So the reason this is so important is it can be very, very labor intensive to create these artifacts just for the purpose of the assessment. And you need to be able to do this in such a way that ideally everything is automated. That's certainly not always possible, but as part of your continuous monitoring, being able to efficiently implement your practices in a way that allows you to more easily create your artifacts, that will pay off tremendously in the long run. And it's not just useful for CMMC. It's really true of any kind of framework or regulation that you have to follow. So fully aware that many, if not most of you, have to follow multiple frameworks. And this is really where you can gain a lot of efficiency. If you can map the artifacts that you're producing to multiple different frameworks, so CMMC, you've got 171, which isn't really a framework, but you've got that set of controls there. Let's say you also need to do or satisfy HIPAA requirements if you're in the healthcare industry, providing services for DoD, PCI, same thing. You can really, through the mapping, figure out a way to make things as efficient as possible. So you're not reinventing the wheel. You're creating an artifact once and reusing it many times. I want you to go ahead and go to the next slide, Scott, here, which is our last slide of the day here. So to pull this all into perspective and just kind of sum it up, I talked about starting off with examining your data, because that's really the key part of all this. From a structural perspective, I highly, highly recommend that you create a project out of this, just like you might with creating a new system in your environment or a new client solution, product, so on and so forth. The project plan will allow you to break out all of the activities as you are aware of them, to know what needs to be accomplished. If you're working on working to a timeline, you can map out your milestones and work to achieve those. You can assign accountability and responsibility. And the advantage of starting now on these things is that your project plan milestones can be spread over a much longer period of time. If you wait 2 years until the time that you actually need to apply for and get a certification, you're going to be faced with a lot of difficulty in terms of a massive amount of change in your environment at the same time. So this allows you to be more comfortable, have a comfortable timeline. Also, as we all know, CMMC is a new framework. If there are changes that come out down the road, or lessons learned, or FAQs come out from the accreditation body, which will be very useful to you, if those impact your plan at all, you can see exactly where they might impact what you're doing, and you can easily adjust your milestones as needed. On the the run piece, I put this in here not just because we're a security company, but a lot of the small and mid-sized businesses that we speak with, especially if you're level 3 and higher, have a lot more controls to implement. And if you only have 1 or 2 IT people, you're going to find it really difficult to implement all of the level 3 or higher requirements in your environment, just because there are so many different controls in place. And there certainly is a way to do that in terms of distributing the responsibilities of the different monitoring process and whatnot. But again, it's very easy, though, to keep layering additional responsibilities on your staff as time goes on, to the point where they get overburdened. So one of the things you'll have to do from a resourcing perspective is to figure out the return on investment or cost benefit of getting new resources using managed services of all kinds, either for your IT, let's say for if you're running cloud computing solutions where you don't have to maintain infrastructure, those get factored in here. Those can really reduce your total cost of ownership for a maturity level 3 program. And when I speak with clients, I kind of point out the different things that are possible in terms of where you might want to go to for help. One of the things that we, aside from just managed services, in terms of data protection, and you start looking at your databases, which again is really where your data lives. There are solutions. We have a couple of them there, DB Protect, App Protector Pro, that can help you understand who's accessing the data, where the data lives, what are the security weaknesses in those environments, helping you monitor access to the data, which all goes to just helping you with risk mitigation and continuous assessment and monitoring, which are so key to the CMMC and other frameworks that you're used to using. And so just getting familiar with these things too, as far as what's out there in industry, is important, so that as you build your plan and you define what you need to do, that you're aware of where to go to for help. Like Exostar, for example, is a great solution with the certification assistance. I personally really like that. I think a lot of thought was really built into how that's created, and it's all about making things easier on you, as opposed to just needing to consume more products and services. This the CMMC framework is a reality we have to deal with, and it's just a matter of how do we approach this in the most cost-effective way, and the most efficient way. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop speaking. I know that was a lot of information, and turn it back on over to you, Scott, for Q&A.
All right, great. Thank you, Darren. A few questions that we've actually gotten several hundred questions, and I've cherry picked a few that I think will complement the materials today. And I'll also let you know we've got another follow-up Q&A webinar scheduled for Thursday that will try to address some additional questions we couldn't get to today. And if you register for that event, you can also add in any additional questions you might have or have thought of after today's event as well. So the first one, and I've gotten a couple variations of this question, and it comes from the manufacturing sector. And it really gets into what I call the OT, or operational technology environments. And I've got one question that says, we've got this OT environment, and it's got, some operating systems that can no longer be patched because they're out of life, but this is a system that's built that way. And in two types of questions around that is, what's the best cybersecurity practice? But then how does CMMC address that today or not, or other guidance that could be given there? Is just segmenting it from, the internet good enough? If you do have CUI that flows over to it, what other special controls do you need to do? And if, at least from the training you've been through, Darren, if you know of any other guidance or suggestions or just security recommendations. And then Mr. Newborn, just any guidance on your side as well that you might be passing out to acquisition staff or not at this point. And I'll let you go first, Darren.
Okay, great. Thanks, Scott. That's an excellent question to ask, and that's something which is very relevant here. So one of the things which when we talk about CMMC, it's included in the control domains are things like risk management, and it's really the process around which you identify and manage the risks in your OT environment that is most important. CMMC does not come right out and say you must patch every single system every 24 hours. If you're running an operating system, let's say you have an HMI or data historian or something like that for an older OT system or SCADA environment, you're not going to be expected to have to update that because in many cases the update may not be available. There's the old joke that the way you tell the difference between an OT system and an IT system is that the OT system is 30 years old. And quite often that is the reality, that especially in manufacturing, not always the case, of course, but you're going to have systems which can't be updated. You may be running Windows XP, and that's just the reality of it, whether security people like it or not. But the most important thing is that you can still apply the CMMC framework to those environments. It's more having the process in place to make sure that you know what the risks are, that you document the risks, and that you know what kind of mitigating controls exist in your environment to protect those systems from the threats that they face. That is the most important thing when it comes to OT. And but I will say here also, going back to the discussion about CMMC Boundary, if your OT systems do not store, process, or create any kind of controlled unclassified information, I would keep them out of any kind of maturity level 3 scoping. Because it's not to say that you still don't need to secure that environment. It's just that if there's no CUI there or federal contract information, why complicate things and bring those further into the picture? And that's especially true if you're using network segmentation to rope off those systems from the rest of your environment. It can be a little bit easier to exclude. So again, I'm actually a huge fan of making sure that your OT environment's protected. You can go no further than the recent news about the water supply organization in Florida that was recently compromised, and the guy increased the chemical in the water that was harmful. That's a great example. You certainly don't want that happening to you. So definitely apply best practices. In terms of where to go, NIST 882 is a great place to go in terms of getting an understanding of the controls that you would want to apply to that environment. But yeah, so there is a way of handling that.
Thank you. And Mr. Newborn, any thoughts or comments?
No. I mean, I ditto exactly what Darren said, and I'm kind of glad he distinguished. There are differences in regards to security requirements from a IT versus OT, and it is the environment. And one other thing I want to let the audience know is that when you really take a look at DFARS and you look at CMMC, it is the information types. It's not the end product. And I think a lot of people are getting things mixed up of saying, oh yeah, well, what am I going to do with my supply chain? And they look at it as that product, whether it's whether it's the hardware, the software, the end item, it's the information flow. And just like Darren said, if you do have a OT type of a mechanism, you really have to take a look at the information flows. You have to take a look at the interfaces, everything that's going to enter into that hardware. And I know some of the machines really do a good job in regards to, they basically hand walk the information. They don't have a connected network. They hand walk the information to the machine. They download it. And then as soon as that run is done, they take it out, they delete everything out, and they're good to go. And that's kind of like the process. You want to say best practices, lessons learned from an industrial standpoint. So the only thing that you really have to worry about is training your folks, as well as the physical security, and making sure that the endpoints in regards to where that information resides is protected. But other than that, everything that Darren said, 100% spot on. And this is where folks need to understand they may need to get some other, you want to say, touch points in regards to their strategy of how they're going to protect their OT, and just have somebody take another look. Over.
All right, thank you very much. Now I'm going to combine, I've got a couple of questions that are international in flavor. I've got it from Canada, I've got one from Japan, and then over in Europe, I believe from Denmark as well. And to consolidate them, it goes to the question of, these are suppliers primarily, but they're suppliers into primes or into the DoD. And how is this going to come into play internationally, where currently, I know it seems in the US, we've got provisional assessors and they're being targeted initially for the first number of contracts in 2021. What guidance can be shared with how this is going to roll out internationally as well for the supply chain? And maybe some insights there, Mr. Newborn.
I wish I did. This is, and this is where I put my hands up and I'm saying, boy, I haven't heard anybody talk really other than ITAR of what they're planning on doing, as well as when you start taking a look at some of the regulations, they do not support at the moment international of where the information is going to reside. They are looking at it from a CONUS standpoint. So again, for me, that's well beyond my knowledge base, as well as I wouldn't even know where to point, because that's going to be a OSD higher up in regards to what their plans are. I just don't know. And I haven't heard anything about it. I know there's a lot of questions going on, and these questions have been asked for over a year, and I have not seen any responses at all. Sorry about that.
No, all right. And just from the perspective that I have, I know I've spoken to different suppliers from around the world, and I know there's different international countries that are also looking at CMMC and the requirements and how to work with the DoD on that. And the guidance that I give, because I don't see the authoritative statements out there, is let's wait and see and keep looking towards the acquisition, DoD senior leadership in the AB as it evolves, because that's where I think it's a government program that's going to continue to evolve and roll out. So thanks for that perspective. I've got one question that I think is a key one, just to make sure people know where to go. And that is, has a list of 3POs been released by the DoD? And does the audit company have to be registered, or individual auditors being registered? How does that really work? And where does one go to try to find that source of truth? And I'll throw that one to you, Mr. Newborn. I think I know the answer too, but let's hear it from you.
Yeah. I was going to say, and this is one of the things that I have, in my training material, really the CMMC AB website. And Scott, we're both laughing. If you go to that website every day, I don't think anybody can go through it, but that's the information. I mean, it's a wealth of information. I look at it at least once a week because I get lost trying to go through it, but that's where you're going to get your information regarding the independent third-party organizations, which just to pass on the information, they are going through their ISO certification right now. So even if CMMC was in your contract, the organization have to get their certification to do the audits before they can even assign an assessor. So it could be the point the assessors could be ready, have their guidebooks done, but the organizations haven't received their ISO certifications for doing audits until that happens. And I've been able to talk to Regan. So this is a ongoing process. It's going to take time, to get the standards, to get the certification. So again, it's one of those things of, I know people are moving out on CMMC. This is where we go back to the crawl and the walk to say, please concentrate on the 171, get at least the 90%, because right now the DIDCAT, in regards to doing their medium and the high assessments, people are failing at the first, second, and third iterations. So it's, again, concentrate on the 171. Don't do things that are going to distract from that of trying to worry about CMMC at this moment.
All right, thank you. I've got, I think, time for one question. This is, where can I find, and I've got this in multiple flavors from different people, recommended partners to help with identifying gaps and implementing solutions to meet necessary requirements. And I've got multiple answers to this one, and then I'll let you both chime in. I know the EPA, again, has got different market segments that they are in the business of kind of licensing and certifying different professionals or organizations and things like that. They have a registered practitioner designation for organizations and people. That's one list to look at. I know Exostar has got a subset of those that we work with as well, that work with our tool sets, and that's one that we do additional qualifications on just ourselves. The one thing that I'll say is, in working with any C3PO or other third-party organization, is always do your own due diligence. I know with the folks that I've seen on both the DoD website and that we work with in our partner program, everybody's got slightly different specialties or capabilities. Some might help with remediation more, have other solutions. Some might just do readiness assessments. So it really gets into what are your requirements, what are your gaps, what are your needs, and then what are your budgets as well, and then timing, because everybody's got different timing aspects with when they need to start and complete kind of different aspects of the projects. So that's just my thoughts. Darren and Mr. Newborn, if you want to throw in any other thoughts or comments, and I think that'll wrap it up for today.
Yeah, that's I echo what you said, Scott, and agree completely. And really, the only note that I'll say on top of that is just that while we're talking about all of these frameworks, fundamentally, if you look at the control families in 800.171, or you look at the domains in CMMC, there's really nothing new there in the way of new practices or new ways of implementing controls that you're probably not already used to doing. So I always like to say that compliance is a byproduct of good practice. And in this case, you're really not implementing anything that is vastly different. The only thing is that you're making sure to align it to the frameworks that you need to work on. So like 800.171, you need to do that today, definitely, as Chris was saying. So partners that you speak with, really the main guideline I would have is just do your due diligence, but also just making sure that they have the track record in helping you out in the specific areas that you need, and then overlaying CMMC on top of that. But it's the underlying kind of fundamental people, process, technology type solutions that are really going to make the difference here. So that's all I had.
And probably, Chris, for you, not a question, but just any wrap up or final thoughts that you have from the government's perspective on today's session.
Yeah. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity. One thing I wanted to give as a leave or takeaway is what Darren has stated in the very beginning of communications. If when in doubt, and let's just say I'm the government rep, when in doubt on your side, pick up the phone call, put in writing, but contact your government representative, whether it's the contracting officer, whether it's the contracting officer representative, whether it's DCMA, Defense Contracting Management Agency, any one of these government agencies regarding this, and I'm saying this, the DFARS, as well as transitioning to the CMMC. This is not easy. This is hard. We are here, we are open arms, and we want to work collaboratively because we want this to be a win-win. If you think the DCMA, when they do their assessments, I won't say audit, but assessments, and they're going in, they're not trying to go in to ding you, they're trying to go in to help you, because it's better to be proactive instead of waiting until there's a cyber incident and we be reading about it in the news, and then now bad behaviors come up and everybody's trying to, CYA. So my message to you is, when in doubt, pick up the phone, call a government person, start explaining to them in regards to try to get help, work with your other contractor in regards to third-party providers. But again, we're here to help. We're here to listen. We're not after you. We want to help you. We want to provide assistance. So whether you're getting it from the government or whether you're getting it from your third-party industry and everything, we're here to help and listen. That's all.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. Again, you can contact us with additional questions at cmmc-team@exostar.com. This is also being recorded and it will be available after the event. And you can also email us for a copy of the presentation. And again, we'll have a follow-up session next week that you can register for where we'll do additional Q&A. Thanks very much, and have a great day and stay safe. Take care.